Hi everyone. So we are going to be talking about the terms that you are going to be illustrating in your dictionary for this project. Now we're going to be using InDesign for this project, and so this may be a new piece of software for you. I am going to be doing a video that will talk about how to format your book, but to get us started, I think we need to talk about these terms and understand what they mean to graphic design. So I'm going to start a new document here for myself. I'm actually going to make it horizontal. This is something to pay attention to because it's going to come into play for every one of yours. You always want to set your proportions to inches. If we come over here to print, we are doing a print document. We are doing a letter document, but they tend to want to give us that in picas right off the bat. So I'm going to go ahead and after I clicked on that, I need to redo inches. I'm going to make this a horizontal document just to give us the biggest amount of space for me to do this demo and kind of jump right into it. So the differences between Illustrator and InDesign are pretty subtle at this point. I can't just click here and get a text line. I actually have to draw a box. So that's a huge difference, and that is because Illustrator is really an illustration program, while InDesign is really about putting together some large documents for production. So the first word we're going to be talking about is tracking. I'm going to zoom out because we're going to do this word a couple of times, and I'm going to get my box a little bit smaller. So tracking is the amount of space between letters within a word. And so this is how the font was created in terms of the tracking. But we as designers can go in and choose to add some space between that. And you can see up here, this VA is where we're going to go. And I can add 200, or I could smush it. Now, smushing it is generally not recommended because it can impact readability. You can see that these three serifs joined where the other letters actually maintained some distance at a reasonable rate. So tracking is just simply adding space in between our letters. Now, why would we do this as designers? I'm going to track something out. I smushed something and I felt like I needed. So tracking is often done because sometimes when you're setting a title, let's just set a title. This is my title. I'm gonna get rid of the tracking first. So this is my title. And so let's say that I wanted to come in underneath it and say, this is this, let's say also important. So we wanted to add another thing to our composition that was also important, beyond the title. And I'm going to make this slightly bigger. And so maybe we wanted that also important information to like nest itself right here. Actually, this unfortunately nests itself quite nicely. But it's not quite to the end of that E. And for alignment's sake, we like the idea that it comes right to the edge of that E. So I could come in here and track that out so that it nicely fits and kind of creates this really nice relationship. And it nicely fits for a couple of reasons. Number one, that A and that Y are working, but maybe we have something longer. Also, this is important with others. So let's put with info. So maybe we want to track it out here, and we could track it just a little bit longer. So it fits in nicely there. So it's also used to emphasize something. So for example, creating a textural difference in your type to call attention to a date or something else within a design. So tracking is really important for multiple reasons. It's used for spacing. It's used to draw attention because the textural differences, and or to fill a space because it makes sense. So that is tracking. Our next word is letting. And letting, is actually tough. Letting is actually tough because I need more than one thing here. And let me just grab some text. And this program should give me lorem ipsum, which is, if I go to, all right, so we're going to go ahead and fill this with lorem ipsum. So if we go to type down to fill with placeholder text, this is going to give us what is known in graphic design as lorem ipsum. It's just type that is intended to be a body copy to hold the place for a designer who may not have the content from your client. And so it's often used. I never let people use lorem ipsum in your project. You actually have to use actual type. And we'll talk about that every time we get to the point where you're in a project that requires large chunks of type. But lorem ipsum is a really important term. It used to be part of this assignment, but in an effort to kind of shorten the amount so that we could change the way we produce this, I have cut it, but it's very, very important for us to know about. It's based on Latin, which is not a spoken language anymore, but I don't think it's actual Latin. I think it just mimics that. And so let's talk about the word that's important here, and that's letting. So letting is the space between lines of type. And the reason why it's called letting is because back in the day when we were setting type by hand using letterpress, the bars in between each line would be made of lead. And so that's why historically it's called letting. So it's a great way to remember it. I always think that if there's a way to remember a word in a unique way, kind of like my approach is to learn, encouraging you to remember serif and sans serif, that I always try to mention it. So letting is the space between those lines of type. And you would do this if you had a document that you wanted to make feel very light. Notice that if I pull this box larger, it doesn't add to the amount of text, and frankly I'm going to take a little bit of our text away just so that we can get the maximum impact. So this would be what is considered normal letting. Now we haven't gotten normal body copy yet, so we know normal body copy is about 9 point for most fonts, occasionally 10 point, but it's pretty strongly 9 point most of the time. So this is normal letting, and I'm going to copy that over. And letting that's been changed, and letting is typically 1 and some change. You can see that we are right now at 9 point type, so our letting for this is 10.8, and so typically letting is about 2 points larger. You can see that it's almost 2 points in this situation, but not quite. And so we're going to go ahead and add some space, and so it's just simply adding space between your lines of type. Now, you know, you can actually, let's actually use this. You can actually take leading away. It's not optimal. Creates a lot of reading issues. So I'm going to show you. If you were to do this for a small amount of type, that might be okay. But one of the things I want you to see is that ascender and descender start kind of butting heads a little bit. So there's only so far you can take it, and you can see that we're at the same level. So if we go at 10, it's a little bit better, but probably not in your best interest to tighten type up. But certainly if you need to take up space or create a certain shape, leading is an option. It's often done in programs to make it seem like there's not as much text that's being read. This seems like a lot more than this sometimes because it feels nice and light visually, whereas this actually feels a little bit more dense and harder, you know, and more to read than this. Imagine a full page of this. All right, so that is leading. Moving on to kerning, which is a really important term for us. Let me just get rid of this. Kerning is, and we may actually have to find a font that's poorly kerned. So kerning is the space here between each of these visually, and you can see that the K, because of the way it's formed, actually feels like it's further away than the E, even though probably numerically it's not. You can see that they're pretty close, and that's pretty common with K. It's funny that kerning is called kerning, and K and E always have this issue. The other reason why it happens is because the E kind of has that rounded area here. So to kern something, and this is actually, this font is not necessarily a terribly kerned font. Let's see if we can find a really just brutal one. Usually fonts that are free are poorly kerned. So I'm just going to find something here that I think is atrocious. Oh, that's not, it could be worse. I'm just trying to find some of the fonts that I've downloaded that are really terrible. Okay, that's a terrible one. So it's very often displays. And the reason why this is terrible, number one, it's not a really good looking font anyway. But do you see how much space are between that K and that E? And there are other things happening. So I don't want to do this because this is a terrible example to begin with. Not the example I was looking for. Okay, that actually is not, that actually has a pretty terrible KE relationship. So let's do this. So you can see that visually this feels very, very distant, whereas these guys feel much tighter. So the way that you kern something is you actually select the first letter in the pair, and kerning is always between pairs of letters. And you use the same tool that we do when we use leading, which is right up here. And so I'm going to pull that E closer. And we don't want to go too far. We want to take a step back and make sure that we're, and I think we could go just a little bit more. And that might be too much. So I was right between 50 and 60. So I'm going to go 55. Sometimes you're manually bringing it up here. And so then we're going to go through and see if there's anything here. And to be honest, this N and this G are probably just a little bit too far away. So I'm going to pull that closer. And that looks a little bit better. We might be able to go one more tick. And so that's much better. Now, one of the things that happens with kerning is as you start to fix things, then you notice others. So the E and the R actually, I think, could just use just a little bit. And so that looks pretty much better, pretty improved. I'm actually going to go back to the 60 for the KE. And so we can see that this looks like a very tightly relating set of letters, whereas when we look down here, we can see that this big space exists and this big space exists, and, when you look at the R and the E after everything's been cleaned up, they look a little funky. Now you only do this when you're doing titles. And so, titles are something that, should be large and very, very visible. Can't really do this in your body copy or, in other places unless there's minimal text to be impacted or minimal text that is being used. You might want to kern, but we only want to do this in titles typically. All right, so let's move on to font family. So font family. So my favorite font is Frutiger. And I talk about it and it's my favorite sans serif font. So I'm going to go ahead and set my Frutiger up here. And I'm going to set it with the lightest version of itself. So a font family, I'm going to make this slightly smaller because if we don't, we're not going to have space for the whole family. So we'll bring it down to maybe 36. All right, we're going to close our window down because I'm going to just be duplicating this. So font family is, a family that visually has relationships but has weight differences that help us as designers create something called visual hierarchy. And visual hierarchy is actually one of our words. That means the level of importance that you as a designer set for somebody to see. And I don't know, we should be able to get through this. So that is our lightest version of Frutiger. Now, if I come down here to Frutiger's options, you can see that I have 57 light condensed, and then I'll come down and do 70 or 67 bold condensed, and then I will come down here and do 77 black condensed, and then I will do 87 black condensed, and this actually should be this 47 light condensed, and then this is our 45, and then we have our 55, then we have our 56 italic, and we have our 65 bold, and then we have our 65 bold italic, and then we'll have our black, and we still have 2 more to go. It's one of the reasons why I like Frutiger. It's a big, nice sans serif family, and we're going to talk about why that's important in 1 minute. So we're going to do 76 black italic, and then we're going to do 95 ultra black, and you can see that it actually was too big for the box, and I needed to open it up. So why is this important? Well, let's say that you're designing a book. Every time you want to create some nuanced bit of information or variety in visual hierarchy, you need a font that is like Frutiger. that will go the distance for you. You don't want to be using multiple fonts. You want the page to look like it relates fully and completely. And if we're changing the fonts around every time, it could look like a font circus at some point. So that's where a font family comes into play. Most people will find that they will have a really favorite sans serif, mostly because sans serifs are the beige of the typography world. We need them a lot. We need them for supporting information after we've created a big splash with maybe a display font. So Frutiger is my favorite font family. All right, so the next one, actually, we're going to have to generate some text. So I'm going to go in and grab myself some a column. And remember, we went down here and we did fill with placeholder text because this relates to placeholder text quite a bit. So I'm going to copy this. Well, not placeholder text. This relates to body copy. So I'm going to copy this, but this is also about aligning text. So when text is aligned on the left, that is considered flush left, and is typical for almost all of the time that you're usually going to set type. Now there is centered text. Now that's not a term that I require that you have in your arsenal for this dictionary, but I wanted to point it out. And then there is flush right. And so you can see that this is flush left, which means that this is rag right. So let's talk about rag, since these two terms are interrelated. We have this ragged edge, and we will play with that in a minute once I finish. One last thing. So one term that you are required to do, and these are 3 terms that are going to be on the same 2 pages because they're interrelated and they're kind of boring, is justified. Now justified, it means that it's straight on the left and straight on the right. So we have flush left. We have our centered text, which we're not defining. And mostly we're not defining that is because centered text is kind of like deciding not to format text. It creates some readability issues, and it's only good in a couple of places. So we have our flush left, we have our justified, which is straight on both sides. Notice the difference between these 2 types. So you can see that there are little lit rivers, and if you squint your eyes when the type is black, you'll see them more often. What it does is it goes and incrementally puts in space in between all of the words, and so it creates these little rivers. If you're squinting through your eyelashes, you'll see them. Whereas if I come over here, you can see that I have kind of one big river down here, but pretty much nothing. So that is something to be aware of. There are some people that have really strong reactions to justified type. For me, if my design is clean and I need really tight lines, it's really appropriate. If I don't, then I'm gonna, possibly use flush left or flush right. And then this is flush right because, it's a straight line on this side. So that's flush left, justified, and flush right. Now let's talk about rag since we're here with this. By the way, let's also talk about hyphens, even though that's not. You can see that hyphens are on for me. Now, if this was readable text, it would be really important for us to make sure that the way we're hyphenating makes sense and that we aren't hyphenating a word that actually could be read just as a simple word, because that sometimes can create some issues. But hyphenations are good because it helps you a little bit with rag. So rag is this ragged edge. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this guy. And I'm going to do, I'm going to make these two the same, because now what we're going to do is I'm going to come in and create boxes in each of these. I'm going to color them. And I think I'm just going to leave them black. And I'm just going to copy, oops. I'm going to copy them because I want to create an awareness of this edge. That's really what RAG is about. Oops. Sorry, I don't have something more entertaining to say, but I'm going to focus on this so that we can get a really good sense of this in and out that happens. So you can see that this subtle in and out, and the rag here is not horrible. I'm actually going to put a white box here just so that we can more closely focus in on this. So you can see that there's these subtle in and outs. Now, really bad rag creates these very big ins and outs, and this really only has issue down here. One of the thing I will say is that this is the end of a paragraph, and this is the end of a paragraph, and this is an end of a paragraph. So they don't really actually count. And then I apparently didn't do the rest of that down here, but we'll go ahead and do it. So the only place that there is like a little bit of awkwardness is here. Again, the ends of a paragraph don't count because we didn't tab over. Those aren't super obvious sometimes. It's one of the things that people sometimes don't do is setting those tabs. And you can see as soon as I did that, I reflowed the text. So I'm gonna go back to no tabs. So that means that we need to come over here. And so typically what we want to see as designers is no more than 3 to 5 spaces in between. And so you can see that right here at NAM, we really drop down, and right here we really drop down, and right here we really drop down. So the way that as designers we fix that, and you only do this, you wouldn't obviously do this if you were setting copy for a magazine, but if you had a short blurb on a poster, you would fix this. Anywhere where you have a little bit of text that you become aware of this, it's important. But in massive projects where there's a lot of text, you probably wouldn't worry about it because, people just deal with it. So the way that we deal with it is the same way that we track out. So we're going to come over here and we're just going to add a little bit of tracking. Now, I tend not to go as far as 10, but the goal here is we bump this out, and then we bump this out, and then maybe we bump this out a little bit. So I'm going to do 5 here. And you want to do it as minimal as possible because, if you do too much, it becomes obvious. So we're going to do just a little bit here. I'm going to do 5 here. And so that gives us just a little bit more down here, and it doesn't make this paragraph drop off quite so much. So that is RAG. So visual hierarchy, let's not worry about it in here, but let's go to the web and look for examples of visual hierarchy examples, and look at images. So visual hierarchy is something that graphic designers are very much in control of. What's the most important and how are we emphasizing it? What's the next most important? You can see that this is a great example. They made her name the most important. Nothing else changed here, but we know that this is Jane Smith's information. So this is another great example. Better thinking, there's a subtitle, then we know that we're starting a chapter right into the body copy. So even websites have visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy often relates to the movement of something and the placement of something. So for example, we know this is the title, and then we move on to here because this is the second most heavy, and we know that this is the next because they've kind of said it in a way. And then we would move down here and they've given us levels of importance. These are launch events, and then this is the information for that. Keynote lectures, and this is the information for that. And then these are continued. And then this is the text that they considered least important for whatever reason. This looks like addresses and phones and probably when they're open. So visual hierarchy is defining the importance in a document of what's most important, and then setting it or creating it to be that most important thing. And then what's second and what's third and what's fourth. So that's visual hierarchy. So the last thing that we have is line length. And, it's kind of nice that we have our text up here so that we can talk a bit about this. So now this is good line length. Line length is between 35 and let's say 65. And I always, make fun of myself because I feel like, there are very defined numbers, but I never remember the exact numbers, and this is a pretty good approximation. So when you're dealing with line length, you basically you go and count every character, even punctuation and spacing. So in this line, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. So kind of right in the middle. So this has got about 45 characters. And really to get a true sense of what the line length is, you would copy multiple, you would count multiple lines and then see where the middle ground is. So the problem happens is, and we know that we use serif fonts for most body copy when we're designing books or magazines. The problem happens when we have line links that are too long like this. Your reader actually has to use their finger because they get to it gets to be too long for them to follow with just the serifs. And then in the other direction, a line could be too short, and then you can see these awkward hyphens and the way that it is moving, and it actually with regular text becomes more awkward. So line length is between 35 and 65 characters in most situations. Going beyond that is not great. Going below that, sometimes you can get away with, but something like this you absolutely can't do. You can see, let's pull this out until we see something reasonable. And you can see how impactful it is to the rag. Like if I pull it back, you can see how the rag gets just brutalized. So let's pull it out a little bit until we're where we need to be. And then let's count it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 30. And so you can see that we're going to be slightly into the mid 30s, which is really where we define, and that's where the rag was kind of starting to look good. So those are your terms: tracking, leading, kerning, font family, justified, flush left and flush right, visual hierarchy, rag, and line length. You're going to be doing dictionaries for each of these words. On the left page, you're going to be writing your own definition of that based on your research and based on this demo. You're also going to write a description based on how you as a designer might need to use that in the future. And again, during this demo, I talked a little bit about how, for example, kerning is used and why it's important to graphic designers, and how font families are used and why it's important to graphic designers. So you're not only going to define it, but you're going to tell us why it's important to designers. And you can glean quite a bit of that from this demo, but you can also do your own research. Remember, you're writing both your definition and your description. And then on your right-hand page, you're actually going to do visual examples. Why is that important? Because you guys are visual tactile learners. And so you learn best by doing, and by asking you to show me what you know, I'm playing into your ability to understand it well and to exhibit that understanding. All right, thank you. Bye.